My wife stood in our living room and screamed that I wasn't our son's real father. She said it loud enough to humiliate me, loud enough that the neighbors could have heard if the windows were open. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I packed a bag and left the country that night. Folks, Uncle Mickle here. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, and I'm not telling it for drama. I'm telling it because what happened next changed the course of my life in a way I never could have imagined. And if you've ever been betrayed by the one person you trusted most, you're going to want to hear this all the way through. This happened a few years back, when I was in my mid-40s. I'd already lived some life by then. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't naive. I thought I knew who I'd married. I thought I knew who I was raising a child with. I thought wrong. The night she said it, the air in that room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. Our son was asleep upstairs, his little nightlight still glowing under the door, toys scattered on the rug, family photos on the wall, a whole life frozen in place, while one sentence tore through it like a blade. "You're not his real dad," she shouted. Not whispered, not cried, shouted. There was something cruel in her eyes when she said it. Not guilt, not fear, almost satisfaction, like she'd been holding that sentence back for years, waiting for the right moment to throw it in my face. I remember standing there, my hands at my sides, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't ask who. I didn't even ask if she was lying. Something inside me went very still, very cold. That part of me knew, whatever the truth was, the marriage I thought I had was already dead. So I went upstairs. Quietly. I didn't wake my boy. I stood in the doorway for a second and watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling. The kid I taught how to ride a bike. The kid who called me dad without hesitation. Blood or no blood, that bond was real, and that's something nobody can ever take away. Then I went back down, grabbed my passport, stuffed some clothes into a duffel bag, and walked out the door. I didn't tell her where I was going. I didn't tell anyone. By sunrise, I was on a flight headed to Japan. Now, I know what you're thinking. Japan. Why Japan? Why not stay and fight? Why not demand answers? Here's the thing. When a truth hits you that hard, that fast, you don't always choose the most logical path. You choose the one that lets you breathe. For me, that meant distance. An ocean's worth of it. I landed in Tokyo 2 days later with jet lag, a hollow chest, and no real plan beyond not being in that house anymore. I checked into a small hotel, stared at the ceiling the first night, and replayed her words over and over again like a broken record. "You're not his real dad." What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her words didn't just push me away. They triggered something she had no control over anymore. Something I'd set in motion long before that night, quietly, legally, and with more patience than she ever gave me credit for. 2 weeks after I left, a registered letter arrived at our house back in the States. She signed for it herself, and when she opened it, she collapsed. That letter held the truth she thought she'd buried forever, and it didn't just expose a lie. It destroyed the story she'd been telling herself for years. And that, folks, is where this really begins. Before everything shattered, my life was quiet in the best way. Predictable. Steady. The kind of life you don't brag about, because it doesn't need defending. I worked a regular job, came home at the same time every evening, and knew exactly where my slippers were without looking. That kind of rhythm does something to a man. It convinces him that what he has is solid. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married a little over 11 years. We met the old-fashioned way, through mutual friends, back when people still trusted introductions. She laughed easily back then, had a warmth that drew people in. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She felt safe. And at my age, safe mattered more than sparks. Our son, Michael, was the center of everything. From the moment he was born, my life organized itself around him without effort. Mornings were cereal spills and mismatched socks. Evenings were homework at the kitchen table, me pretending to understand math that had changed since my day. Weekends meant soccer games, scraped knees, and that proud little grin he gave me whenever he scored a goal and looked straight to the sidelines for my reaction. Home smelled like coffee in the mornings and laundry detergent on Sundays. The TV was usually on low volume in the background. Photos of us lined the hallway, vacations, birthdays, Blurry phone pictures that only mattered because they were ours. If you'd asked me then, I would have told you I was a lucky man. Not rich, not perfect, but anchored. Sarah and I weren't newlyweds anymore. We didn't flirt like we used to, but we worked. Or at least, I thought we did. We talked about bills, school schedules, grocery lists. We shared responsibility. I believe that was love maturing. Less fire, more structure. Looking back now, I can see how much I filled in the gaps with assumptions. I assumed silence meant peace. I assumed routine meant honesty. I assumed that because I was faithful, because I was present, because I was trying, that it was enough. She started pulling away in small, reasonable ways. Extra time on her phone. Late errands that didn't quite add up, but weren't suspicious enough to accuse. When I asked how her day was, her answers got shorter. Not cold, just edited. Like she was choosing which parts of herself to show me. I told myself it was stress. Parenting isn't easy. Marriage isn't easy. Everybody has phases. That's what adults do. We rationalize discomfort because the alternative is too painful to consider. Now, let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was off, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this. Because I had that feeling. A quiet one. Not loud enough to panic, but persistent enough to whisper when the house was still. I remember watching her one night from across the living room while she scrolled through her phone, the glow lighting her face. She smiled at something on that screen. Not a big smile, just a quick one. And when she noticed me looking, she turned the phone face down on the couch. I didn't say anything. Michael adored her. That mattered to me. I wanted stability for him more than answers for myself. So I swallowed questions. I focused on being a good father, on being reliable. I thought if I held everything together tightly enough, nothing would slip through. But lies don't need space. They just need time. There were moments that didn't fit anymore. Stories that changed slightly. Dates that didn't line up. She once snapped at me for asking where she'd been. Not angry exactly, but defensive in a way that felt misplaced. Then she apologized too quickly, too smoothly. I told myself I was overthinking. The truth is, when a man builds his identity around being dependable, he doesn't want to admit the foundation might be cracked. I believed my role was to endure, not to question, to protect, not to pry. That belief cost me more than I knew, because by the time I noticed the distance clearly, really saw it, she had already decided how disposable I was, and I was still standing there, thinking we were on the same side. The night she finally said those words didn't come out of nowhere. I just didn't recognize the warning signs for what they were. And once that door opened, there was no closing it again. The first real crack didn't come with shouting or tears. It came quietly, disguised as coincidence. That's how these things usually start. Small enough that you question yourself before you question them. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because Tuesdays were predictable. Leftovers for dinner. Homework at the table. Sarah usually got home around 6. That night, it was closer to 8. No text. No call. I wasn't panicking. Not yet. But when she finally walked in, she didn't apologize. She went straight to the sink, washed her hands like she'd just come from somewhere important, and asked what was for dinner. Not how was your day. Not sorry I'm late. Just business as usual, like the clock hadn't moved. I asked where she'd been. Lightly. Casual. She hesitated. Just a second too long. Then said she'd lost track of time running errands. That answer sat wrong. Errands don't make you look guarded. They don't make you avoid eye contact. But I nodded anyway. I always nodded. A few days later, I was paying bills online when I noticed a charge I didn't recognize. A hotel. Not far from our house. Middle of the afternoon. It wasn't outrageous. Cheap enough to explain away. Expensive enough to notice. When I asked her about it, she laughed. Actually laughed. Told me it must have been fraud. Said she'd call the bank. She kissed my cheek and told me not to worry so much. She never called the bank. That's when my instincts finally spoke up louder. Not yelling. Just firm. Something wasn't right. I started paying attention. Not spying. Just noticing. Patterns form when you stop filling in the blanks with hope. Her phone never left her hand anymore. She angled the screen away when texting. Password changed. Bathroom door locked. And every time I walked into a room unexpectedly, there was that flicker in her eyes, surprise mixed with calculation. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Part of me wanted proof. Real proof. Not assumptions. Not paranoia. The other part was scared of what I'd find. Because once you know, you can't unknow. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I didn't pick it up. I just saw the name light up the screen. David. No last name. No context. Just a heart emoji next to it. My chest tightened. I walked away. That was my line. And I crossed it later. Not with my hands, but with my thoughts. I replayed everything from the past year and realized how many times I'd chosen comfort over clarity. That night, I lay in bed next to her while she slept, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing. I wondered how long someone could lie without it changing the way they slept, without it changing the way they looked at the person beside them. The next morning, I made a decision, not a dramatic one, a quiet one. I scheduled a paternity test, not because I didn't love my son. God knows I did, but because something Sarah said weeks earlier suddenly echoed in my head. A passing comment during an argument about discipline. You don't get to decide everything. At the time, it felt like frustration. Now it felt loaded. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it was just information. That knowledge didn't mean action. I needed to know what I was standing on. While I waited for the appointment, Sarah's behavior shifted again. She got sharper, more dismissive. Arguments escalated faster. And then one night, out of nowhere, she accused me of being distant, of hiding things. That's when I realized she was preparing. People don't accuse without reason. They project. They lay groundwork. They rewrite history before the truth has a chance to speak. I stayed calm. I watched. I listened. And when the test date finally arrived, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't. Because whatever that paper said, my life was about to change. Folks, pause for a second. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted her right then? Or would you have waited and watched? Drop your answer below. I'm curious what you would have chosen. The day the results came in, I didn't open them right away. That might sound strange, but when you're standing at the edge of a truth that can permanently alter your life, hesitation feels like self-defense. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter while I made coffee. I watched the machine drip slowly, one drop at a time, like it was counting down for me. Sarah was at work. Michael was at school. I was alone with the quiet and that thin white envelope. I picked it up, put it back down, picked it up again. I remember thinking, whatever this says, I'm still his dad. I needed to say that to myself before I broke the seal, like armor. Because biology is powerful, but it isn't the same as love. And I didn't want that line blurred by shock. When I finally opened it, my hands didn't shake. My chest did. Probability of paternity, 0%. That was it. No drama. No apology. Just math. Cold, precise, undeniable. I sat down at the table and stared at the words until they stopped looking like language and started looking like symbols. My mind tried to reject it first. Mistake. Mix-up. Wrong sample. But the deeper part of me, the one that had been paying attention all along, nodded quietly. So that was the truth she'd been carrying. I didn't cry. Not then. Shock doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with numbness, so complete it feels like calm. I folded the paper back into the envelope and placed it inside a drawer like it was something fragile. Then I waited. I didn't confront her that night. Or the next. I watched her move through the house like nothing had changed. Watched her kiss our son goodnight. Watched her complain about traffic and bills and laundry like her life wasn't built on a lie. Every normal moment felt unreal now. Like watching a play where only you know the ending. A few days later, the argument happened. It started over nothing. A forgotten grocery item. A tone she didn't like. But underneath it, there was tension already stretched too tight. And suddenly she snapped. She said I wasn't his real father. She didn't say it accidentally. She said it with intention. With cruelty. Like she wanted to hurt me before I could hurt her. That was the lowest point. Not the test. Not the cheating. That moment. Because she didn't just betray me. She tried to strip away my identity. to erase years of love with one sentence. And she expected me to beg for clarity, to demand answers, to fall apart. I didn't give her that. I looked at her and realized something important. She had no idea what I knew. She thought she was in control. She thought she was dropping a bomb. She didn't know I'd already been standing in the rubble. I need you to understand something here. This wasn't just betrayal. This was my whole life collapsing in slow motion while I stayed upright through it. Have you ever been blindsided like this? Someone you trusted completely, just destroying everything? Share your story below if you've been there. Let's heal together. That night, after I left the house, I booked a flight. Japan wasn't about running. It was about creating space. Legal, emotional, and psychological space. I needed distance so I could think clearly, without manipulation, without guilt. I brought copies of everything with me. The test, bank records, dates, messages I'd quietly documented. Not for revenge, for truth. From the other side of the world, I replayed the past decade with new eyes. All the moments that didn't fit finally snapped into place. And with that clarity came something unexpected. Peace. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But clarity is powerful. It takes away fear. It takes away confusion. And when you know the truth fully, no one can weaponize it against you again. Sarah thought she'd humiliated me. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that the truth was already sealed in an envelope, one that would soon find its way back to her. And when it did, she wouldn't be the one holding power anymore. Japan has a way of slowing your thoughts, whether you want it to or not. Maybe it's the order of things. The quiet respect people show each other. The way trains arrive exactly when they're supposed to. Like the world, there still believes in structure. I didn't go sightseeing much. I walked. I sat. I let my mind finally catch up to my body. For the first few days, all I did was sleep and eat when I remembered to. Jet lag mixed with emotional exhaustion makes time feel elastic. Nights stretched, days blurred, and somewhere in that haze, the anger finally showed up. Not explosive anger, focused anger, the kind that doesn't need shouting. I replayed that moment in the living room again and again. The way she said it, the confidence, the cruelty. That's when I understood something important. She hadn't just cheated. She decided, at some point, that I was expendable. That my love, my years, my fatherhood were convenient, until they weren't. And that clarity flipped a switch in me. I stopped asking why. I started asking what now. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Truth doesn't need theatrics. It just needs timing. And the law respects facts far more than emotions. While Sarah was probably telling friends her version of events, I was making quiet phone calls in the early morning hours. A lawyer back home. Calm. Experienced. No drama. A financial advisor. Just to understand my position. And a courier service. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted resolution. The paternity test wasn't just emotional leverage. It was legal reality. Combined with financial records and documented timelines, it shifted the balance completely. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning protection. For myself. And for the child I still loved, regardless of biology. I drafted a letter. Not an angry one. Not a pleading one. Just facts. Clear. Unemotional. The kind of letter that leaves no room for argument. I had it sent registered mail. I knew exactly when it would arrive. Now, let me be clear about something. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest move you can make. By leaving the country, I removed her ability to control the narrative. No shouting matches. No tears. No scenes where I'd be painted as unstable or cruel. Silence is unsettling to people who rely on chaos. While I waited, I thought about Michael. About how none of this was his fault. About how blood didn't erase bedtime stories, scraped knees, or whispered reassurances in the dark. Whatever happened next, I was determined not to let bitterness poison that truth. That resolve grounded me. When the courier confirmed delivery back home, I didn't feel triumph. I felt calm. The kind that comes when you know the outcome is no longer in your hands, because it doesn't need to be. Here's where I made my choice. And now I want to know, do you believe in revenge, or do you believe in walking away? What's the right move when someone destroys your trust? Comment below. I want to hear both sides. 2 weeks after I left, Sarah opened that letter. Inside was the DNA report, a formal notice from my attorney, and one final paragraph she wasn't prepared for. It didn't accuse. It didn't threaten. It simply stated that the truth was documented, legally acknowledged, and no longer hers to control. I wasn't asking for explanations anymore. I wasn't asking for apologies. I was stepping out of a lie with dignity and tact. Whatever she felt when she read it, shock, fear, regret, that was hers to carry now. And the moment she realized she had underestimated me, that's when the balance finally shifted. I wasn't there when she opened the letter, but I know exactly how it happened. She would have signed for it casually, maybe annoyed at the interruption, probably assumed it was paperwork, something boring, something she could skim while standing at the counter. Then she would have seen the letterhead, my attorney's name. That's when her pulse would have jumped. She would have read faster after that, not carefully, not thoughtfully, just enough to understand the direction things were going. Legal language has a way of stripping emotion out of a situation, and when someone has been hiding behind emotion for years, that kind of clarity hits hard. Then she would have reached the DNA report. The words she once used as a weapon were right there on the page. Cold, clinical, unarguable, probability of paternity, 0%. No shouting, no audience, no way to spin it. I later found out she dropped the letter, just let it slide out of her hands onto the floor. Her sister told me she collapsed onto the chair behind her like her legs forgot what they were for. Because for the first time, Sarah understood something she never thought she'd have to face. The truth was no longer a threat she could wield. It was a fact she had to answer for. She tried calling me. Once. Then again. Then a third time. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. I never deleted it. But I've never listened to it either. Some things don't need to be heard to be understood. My lawyer handled the rest. Conversations became emails. Emotions became bullet points. Every attempt she made to regain control, tears, explanations, sudden regret, landed on neutral ground. That's the thing about preparation. When the moment comes, there's no scrambling, no second guessing. And this is the moment everything changed. Tell me, are you rooting for me right now? Or do you think I went too far? Be honest in the comments. Uncle Mickle can take it. She couldn't humiliate me anymore. She couldn't rewrite history. And the part that hit her hardest? She realized I hadn't left in panic. I'd left with intention. Friends stopped calling me asking for my side of the story. Because the truth had already made its way around. Not loudly, not messily, but clearly. The narrative she'd built for years collapsed under its own weight. She lost credibility. She lost leverage. And most of all, she lost the version of me she thought she could control. I stayed in Japan a little longer after that. Not to hide, but to finish what I started emotionally. I walked through quiet streets at night, neon reflecting off wet pavement, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not joy. Not victory. Relief. Because justice doesn't always look like shouting from rooftops. Sometimes it looks like watching someone realize, all on their own, that they bet against the wrong person. And once that realization sets in, there's no undoing it. When the storm passes, it doesn't leave silence right away. It leaves debris, emotional wreckage you still have to walk through carefully, or you'll cut yourself all over again. I came back home a month later. Same airport, same streets, same house keys in my pocket that suddenly felt heavier than they used to. The house looked unchanged from the outside, but stepping in felt like entering a place I no longer belonged to. The air was different, thinner, like the truth had sucked all the oxygen out of the rooms. Sarah wasn't there when I arrived. That was intentional. Lawyers had arranged it that way. We didn't need another scene. We didn't need closure through conversation. Closure was already in motion. Michael ran to me when he saw me later that week. That part mattered. He hugged me the same way he always had. No hesitation. No confusion. Just arms wrapped tight around my waist, like they'd been trained to do that for years. In that moment, every doubt I'd ever had about my place in his life evaporated. Kids know who shows up. They know who stays. The legal side moved steadily. No surprises. The truth tends to do that when it's properly documented. I didn't take joy in watching consequences unfold, but I didn't shield her from them either. Accountability isn't cruelty. It's balance. Sarah tried, in her own way, to explain herself, not to me directly, through intermediaries. Messages about loneliness, about mistakes, about fear. Maybe some of it was real. Maybe all of it was. But understanding doesn't require reconciliation. Some bridges burn cleanly, and rebuilding them just leads you back to the same fire. I settled into a new routine. Smaller place, quieter life, fewer assumptions. I focused on being present when it mattered and absent where it didn't. That alone changed everything. There were nights I still felt the weight of it all. Not anger, grief. Grief for the man I used to be, for the marriage I thought I had, for the future I imagined so confidently. But grief, when you don't rush it, becomes clarity. I learned where my boundaries were. Learned that loyalty isn't proven by endurance alone. Learned that love without honesty isn't love, it's maintenance. And maintenance eventually fails. Looking back now, I wonder if I'd do it all the same way again. What about you? If you could go back and handle your worst betrayal differently, would you? Or was the pain necessary to become who you are now? Let me know below. Michael still calls me Dad. That's the part people always ask about. As if blood has the final say. It doesn't. Time does. Presence does. Consistency does. And I had all three long before anyone questioned my DNA. Life didn't become perfect. It became honest. And there's a difference. I stopped trying to control outcomes and focused on controlling myself. That shift alone brought more peace than any argument ever could. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with quiet strength. And sometimes that's the best ending there is. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest edges of pain. Not by erasing what happened, but by teaching you how to carry it without bleeding on everything you touch. I don't wake up angry anymore. I don't replay conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said or done differently. The truth had its moment, and it did its work. My job now is simpler. Live well, live honestly, and stay present for the people who matter. Betrayal changes you. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. But it doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you precise, more aware, less willing to accept half-truths just to keep the peace. What I learned through all of this is something I carry with me every day. Dignity doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from knowing when to step away and letting reality speak for itself. So here's my final question for you, and I really want to hear your thoughts. Is it better to forgive and move on, or to make sure they understand exactly what they lost? There's no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. If you're listening to this right now and you're in the middle of something painful, a betrayal, a lie, a truth you're afraid to face, let me tell you this straight. You don't need to explode to be powerful. You don't need revenge to reclaim your self-respect. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remove yourself and let the truth catch up on its own. That's not running. That's choosing yourself. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. Self-respect isn't loud. It's what remains when the noise fades.